Yes, sir.
$1 trillion a year on this stuff?
$115 million an hour.
$1 trillion every year, vanishing, not mismanaged, not misallocated, stolen, in suitcases, through airports, funding things most people aren't allowed to say out loud. Watch what happens when someone finally demands a number.
Senator Cornyn, let me just come back to you. I want to get a handle here on just the scale of the fraud in Minnesota. We talked about the dark money groups funding much of what's going on the ground, but let's just get a handle here on the scale of the fraud. You are a member, I want to get this right, of the the Office of the Legislative Auditor. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, of the Legislative Audit Commission.
Audit Commission, got you. You oversee the Office of the
Yes.
Legislative Auditor. Okay, got it. So you've got access to all of this information. Give me your best estimate based on the information you've seen, the audits you've seen. How many of the agencies, 20 or so agencies, I think in the state of Minnesota, public agencies, how many have rampant fraud?
All of them are wrapped up in some sort that can issue. There's 20 primary state agencies in state law. Of the largest, there are 10 of our largest primary agencies. Many of the nonprofits receive grants and funding from all 10 agencies.
If you had to put a number on it, based on what you've seen, your work, your investigations, the audits that you've seen, what do you think the total losses are to Minnesotans in terms of fraud?
I think the conservative number is what our federal investigators have determined. Of just the 14 Medicaid programs, that half of all of it would be about $9 billion. And I don't think that's, and I think the reason I believe that's true is in each audit that the legislative auditor produces, we measure right level in the samples of what they have done. 20 to 80% of each one of them, they're unable to prove that the dollars were actually have gone to the programs in which they're indicated.
$9 billion. How much of this money has left Minnesota for overseas?
Well, I arrived in 2017. The Child Care Assistance Program fraud, for which the program, I believe, is $130 million. The whistleblowers proved or showed us that they believe $100 million of that was fraudulent. We had a whistleblower come forward, actually publicly, and at that time we also discovered something new to me, which is the Hawley process of the movement of cash through our airports in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And what I've come to learn, and that year it was just coincidentally $100 million in fraud, suspected fraud, and $100 million went out in cash through the Minneapolis St. Paul airport. I've learned that.
Tell us how that worked. $100 million in cash through the airport.
In suitcases, back then it was $1 million out of crack. And so I've learned that in the year before it was about $74 million. Secretary Bessent I've tried for 2.5 years to get that number because I wanted to get a view of how many excess dollars are sent out from the program, from the community that's sending them. And in the last 2 years, it was $340 million each year. And so if you look at it, it's about a 25% increase over this period from 2017. That's $1.8 billion in cash. And I don't think the average citizen who works for their money understands how complicated it is to ship or to obtain $6 to $7 million of cash every single week.
This is the moment the hearing stops being procedural and becomes something else entirely. What you just heard wasn't a policy disagreement. It was a senator forcing a witness to say, on the record, that your tax money is moving through airports in suitcases and landing in the hands of people who traffic children and fund terrorism. The federal government knew. No one acted. That's not incompetence. That's a choice. The real question isn't whether the system failed. It's who benefits when it keeps failing exactly the same way, year after year, at scale. Drop one word in the comments: suitcases, if you think someone should be in handcuffs right now.
Of the year. And our federal government certainly must have been aware of it and has done nothing to look at it, but that's just all but about $130 million, I think, is originated out of Minnesota.
You know, but what every American taxpayer absolutely understands is their federal tax money being taken on suitcases out of this country to go heaven knows where. I mean, if that's not infuriating, I don't know what is. And the fact that it is systemic in Minnesota, and probably to your testimony, Mr. Talco, probably systemic in a lot of other places. I mean, millions of dollars in suitcases out of an airport, and that's just one means of shipping this money around. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. I want to come back to you, Mr. Talco. You testified that about $1 trillion you think is lost in fraud every year. Where is this money going? I mean, we know where some of it's going in Minnesota. It went overseas. It went to Somalia. It went to NGO fronts. We know where it's gone in some other states. California gave away billions of dollars to a pro-Hamas NGO. But $1 trillion nationally, where's this money going to?
I appreciate that question because most people don't ask that question. It goes to terrorism. It goes to child trafficking. It goes to drugs. It goes to terrorism. And then it's used to purchase luxury items, cars, purses, homes. That's all funded by people like me that pay taxes.
So you're telling me that the electrician who goes to work every day and clocks in and works his butt off and tries to earn just enough to be able to, make his rent, maybe have a kid or two, put food on the table, his tax money is being used to buy other people luxury items, cars, yachts, whatever else, and is going to fund terrorism and child trafficking?
Yes, sir.
$1 trillion a year on this stuff?
$115 million an hour.
$115 million an hour. How do they get in their hands on it? What are we talking about here? Trends, national organizations, criminal networks? How do they get their hands on this money?
They take advantage of antiquated government systems and processes. They go into programs that they know elected and appointed officials won't touch, and they can steal at scale. And what happened really was during the pandemic, between the PPP loans and the unemployment insurance, they learned a really valuable lesson. Government never runs out of money, and the probability of getting caught is virtually zero. I have it at 0.1%.
So come back to the recommendations that you mentioned in your opening statement. What do we need to do to put a stop to this hemorrhaging of people's hard-earned money going overseas to finance child trafficking and luxury yachts? I mean, what needs to happen here?
It's really simple. It's used every single day in the commercial sector. Front-end identity verification, you just don't get to say, I am who I say I am. Second, recertification of all the recipients. There is so much fraud right now in the benefit programs all across the country. We need to get a baseline. Third, this notion of a third-party independent audit. And finally, is involving federal law enforcement, like the Secret Service, to investigate it. The thing that people don't understand is that most of these beneficiaries, Senator, they're not real. They're fake. There's someone's stolen identity that is getting used in all 50 states.
That's the line that should have broken through every news cycle this week. Not as a talking point, not as a partisan attack, as a mathematical, documented, testified under oath fact. $1 trillion every single year siphoned out of American benefit programs and funneled into terrorism, child trafficking, luxury goods, and overseas accounts. $115 million every single hour. And the mechanism isn't sophisticated. That's what makes this worse. It isn't some elaborate financial dark art requiring genius-level criminals. It's fake identities, antiquated government systems, programs that elected officials deliberately won't touch. The criminals learned one lesson during the pandemic, and they never forgot it. The government never runs out of money, and the probability of getting caught is 0.1%. 0.1%. Think about what that means from the other side of this equation. If you are running a transnational criminal network, and you have discovered a funding source with a 99.9% success rate, infinite supply, and zero political will to shut it down, you don't stop. You scale. You get more sophisticated. You embed deeper. You spread to all 50 states, which is exactly what the testimony confirmed is already happening. But here is what nobody is asking. Why, after whistleblowers came forward in 2017, after $100 million left Minneapolis in suitcases in a single year, after federal investigators confirmed the numbers, after state auditors flagged 20 to 80% discrepancies across every major program. Why did it take this long to get someone under oath on Capitol Hill? Why now? That is the question. The cynical answer is that it wasn't politically useful before. The generous answer is that the machinery of government moves slowly. But neither answer is actually satisfying when you do the math. From 2017 to today, at the rates described in this testimony, we are talking about billions, not millions, that continued moving while the hearings didn't happen. Supporters of the current reform push will tell you this is exactly why DOJ exists. That the federal government has been a willing host to parasitic fraud networks for decades, and that dismantling the administrative state is the only way to cut off the oxygen. They point to Minnesota as proof, not an anomaly, but a preview of what systemic federal-level audit would find everywhere. Critics will argue something different. They'll say that the witnesses in this hearing have political motivations, that the trillion-dollar figure is extrapolated, not audited, that conflating Medicaid fraud with terrorism financing is a rhetorical leap designed to inflame rather than inform, that the solution, identity verification, recertification, third-party audits, sounds simple but would strip benefits from real, vulnerable people caught in bureaucratic crossfire. Both camps are missing the thing that sits between them. The fraud is real. The scale is real. The political will to address it has historically been zero, not because no one knew, but because the programs that get exploited are politically radioactive. Touch them and you get accused of cutting aid to children. Don't touch them and $1 trillion a year funds trafficking networks. That is not a fringe claim. That is what was said, under oath, in a United States Senate hearing room. The suitcase detail is not a metaphor. $6 to $7 million in cash every single week, carried physically through Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, for years, while federal agencies watched and did nothing. The testimony didn't frame this as alleged. It was presented as documented, investigated, and confirmed. And still, for 2.5 years, a state legislator couldn't get the Treasury to return a phone call about the outflow numbers. Secretary Besant finally provided them. The answer was $340 million a year in the last 2 years alone. Think about what this means if you are sitting on the other side of this. If you are an electrician, a nurse, a warehouse worker who pays into this system every paycheck, who has been told for years that the budget is too tight, that benefits need means testing, that there isn't enough money, and you are now watching a Senate hearing where the testimony is that $1 trillion a year has been walking out the door in suitcases, and the catch rate is basically zero. The anger that produces is not partisan. It doesn't belong to one side of the aisle. It is the specific, clarifying fury of someone who has been played. There are historical parallels here that should make everyone uncomfortable. The savings and loan crisis, the post-Iraq reconstruction fraud, the pandemic PPP collapse. In each case, the warning signs were documented before the scale became undeniable. In each case, the political response lagged by years. In each case, the people who bore the cost were not the people who ran the schemes. The difference this time, if there is a difference, is that the infrastructure for accountability may actually exist in a way it didn't before. The combination of federal audit pressure, state-level legislative investigation, and public scrutiny arriving simultaneously is historically unusual. Whether that combination produces consequences or produces another round of hearings that change nothing, that is genuinely unresolved. If this is the kind of analysis you're not finding anywhere else, you already know what to do. The witnesses today gave specific recommendations: front-end identity verification, recertification of all benefit recipients, third-party independent audits, federal law enforcement involvement, Secret Service specifically named. These are not radical proposals. They are standard practice in the commercial sector. The fact that they are being proposed as innovations in government spending tells you everything about how deliberately unguarded these programs have been. The final thing worth sitting with is this. The beneficiaries, according to testimony, are largely not real people. They are stolen identities, ghost recipients, fake names attached to real money in real programs, drawing from real taxpayer accounts, operating in all 50 states. This story is not finished. The hearings will continue. The audits will expand or they won't. The political will to actually prosecute, not just expose, will materialize or it will evaporate the way it always has. But the number is on the record now. $1 trillion a year. $115 million every hour. And the criminals who built this system are still operating, still scaling, still betting that the probability of getting caught stays right where it is. 0.1%. That bet has paid off for a long time. Thanks for watching. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Drop your reaction in the comments. This conversation is just getting started.